The story I'm about to share with you tonight is only part one of a longer series of a group of people that get lost in the Canadian Rockies. This is the beginning of their nightmare. The canyon wasn't displayed on the map. There was a flat swath of green light between topographical mountain peaks with marked elevations, streams, paths, and even a dotted area demarcating protected land described as indigenous peoples. It was within that nondescript green that the canyon existed, known only to those few who had seen it for themselves. The path they were hiking wasn't indicated on the map either. Aubrey didn't think they would need a map, as the outing was more adventurous without a guidebook. Brooke did not want a map. The point had to leave safety nets behind with civilization. Chrissy also voted not to take a map, agreeing with Aubrey. Lizzie had found a map at a gas station and thought it a mistake to go anywhere, especially into uncharted territory without reference and perspective. The gas station had served as a last-chance convenience to stock up on supplies and perishables that they could not bring with them from the States for their excursion. The station had a single gas pump, no canopy, and was exposed to all the seasonal elements the high mountains wrought, explaining its rusty metal and weathered color. It was one of those old-times meter models with ever-winding numbers around a turning cylinder that counted off the gallons and dollars as the gas flowed into the Jeep's tank. Obviously, no credit card swipe to pay at the pump. Inside, behind the counter, was a middle-aged man who was bald with a comb-over and loose jowls, reminiscent of a bulldog. Old before his time, as if the only activity were the accumulation of age. He looked out over the two aisles of standard, nondescript convenience fare. On the counter, accumulated packages of beef jerky and granola bars, trail mix, jugs of water, 1 gallon per woman, and, without discussion or mention, a few chocolate bars. Lizzie noticed the maps in a wooden tray on the counter beside the cash register, suggesting they add one to the growing heap of provisions on the counter. 3-1, they voted against it. Lizzie bought it anyway. Into the back of the Jeep it went with the gear. Driving up the mountain, Brooke's Jeep pushed and struggled high and deeper than any marked road into the Canadian Rockies, passing all designated base camp launching points, grinding and bumping, agonizing in its ever-slowing progress. Ultimately, they reached a grassy clearing among the trees and rocks that was barely big enough for the Jeep to reverse direction, and Brooke called all out. The food, particularly the water, added weight to the packs, and so, as to limit the amount of complaining, Brooke distributed some of her supplies, such as the medical kit and aspirin, to Lizzie's pack to make room for the heavier supplies, as she could fit. From there, it was on foot. The summer air was cold and thin, winding through the pines. Aubrey forged the troop ahead, knocking her boots against the rocky, hard scramble forest floor, pushing aside lower tree branches with her arms. Incline and elevation tired her sooner than she would have guessed. She stepped aside and Brooke took the lead. These 4 women, still in their 20s, were well on their respective paths of professional stability. Products of their generation, marriage and childbearing were quite near the bottom of their bucket lists, while these summer backpacking escapes, a yearly tradition for the better part of a decade, remained rather near the top. They served as both impetus for many reunions and the excuse to prove or reprove that they had not lost the strength of body nor adventure of spirit that they had possessed when they first camped together. Over time, those summers had stacked up. The 4 had explored various ranges throughout the western U.S. Rockies and twice the Cascades. Aubrey had mentioned the idea of heading to the country to the north as something foreign, exotic, and poetically romantic. None had immediately agreed. Dodge, determination, and cajoling were needed to convince the 3 others to join. Sweat blotted out from under the padded straps of their packs. Breathing was regular, but labored. None of them were in the physical condition that they would have imagined, liked, or claimed. Lizzie was on point when she cleared the forested growth and popped out onto a rock ledge. There was room enough for all four to stand beside one another without being in danger of falling, yet without comfort. Lizzie extracted her map, the map none of the others had wanted to find their location. She had already marked the spot where they had left the jeep, and had drawn a line in pencil as they'd advanced. Using her finger, she extended the line from her last position when she'd taken over lead from Brooke to where she estimated this cliff wall was. The cliff was not on the map. Nothing was on the map. Her finger ended against a patch of green. The map just ends. Brooke sat down on the ledge, knees up against her chest to balance the weight of her backpack. Aubrey leaned against a tree. Told you we wouldn't need a map. With her pencil, Lizzie drew the line to the edge of the green and made a small X. According to the map, there was a stream they should have crossed, but had not. She gazed up at the canyon she could clearly see before them, then, quizzically, studied the map as if she could will the details to emerge. Chrissy shifted to sit beside Brooke, and noticed unnatural colors below them. She called to their attention the dome shape beside a cube shape placed together at the bottom tense. Brooke leaned forward to peer over the edge. Sure enough, at its depth, about 50 yards from the bottom of the cliff, intermixed with trees, was an impromptu settlement. It was a small camp of backpackers. The woman debated what this meant, who it might be, and how to reach them. There was no way down, no path or trail they could discern. Then we secure a rope and rappel. Brooke already had her pack off and was pulling out a coil of strange climbing rope. Protest and concern from Lizzie and Chrissy didn't deter Brooke's preparations in the least. She tugged on the rope that she tied around the trunk of a hefty pine, then dropped the rope over the edge. That's a 35-foot rope. Looks like it's just a bit short of touching the bottom. No big deal. More protest, including one to the effect that Lizzie couldn't even remember how to rappel. These Brooke addressed. Don't worry, because technically we won't be rappelling anyway. One of us will lower herself on the rope and see how welcoming the group below is. If they're accommodating, then we lower the packs and the rest climb down. What if they aren't friendly? Then who goes down there, climbs right back up in a hurry if needed? Are you serious? Yeah, while she's climbing, who's ever up here can throw rocks at them. Lizzie thought the entire matter an exercise in stupidity. Then you could stay up here. The plan established, although not entirely agreed upon. It came to choosing who would scout the campsite below. Aubrey volunteered for the challenge, but was overruled when Lizzie felt Brooke should woman up and go down there since, after all, this was her plan. See you, ladies. With that, Brooke was over the cliff, backing down by walking in reverse as she passed the rope, hand under hand. Chrissy watched carefully, as if there were some correlation to her level of attentive worry and Brooke's safe passage. Shouldn't she be wearing gloves? Lizzie was the last down the rope. At the end of the rope, she had help from an unknown man who had assisted her in making up the difference between the height of the cliff and the length of the rope. At 5 feet tall, Lizzie would have needed to drop her height again to cover the distance. Climbing back up would pose the problem of reaching the dangling rope and high above their heads. They would have to pile some rocks or construct a ladder from a fallen tree in order to reach the rope. She wondered how her friends had been able to untie the packs that she had lowered to them. From the ground, she realized the man who had eased her from the rope was well over 6 feet tall. He must have performed the heavy work, maybe even holding one of her friends. Brooke probably on his shoulders so she could reach the packs. Aubrey unnecessarily pointed Lizzie to her pack resting against the rock of the cliff wall. Then, she turned to address the group. This is Lizzie. Lizzie, this is Ella and Professor Lucas. It had been the professor who had assisted Lizzie. Call me Luke. He was tall and muscular, and old enough to be Lizzie's father. Tan cheeks looked all the darker, framed by his white beard. Lizzie's initial reaction was to punch Luke in the throat and send a swift kick to his genitalia. Instead, she clenched her fist and backed away from him. Allow me, the professor, Luke, gathered Lizzie's pack and then led the blended tribe over the scattered rocks to the level ground of their encampment. Ella who was taller than Jamie, which did not make her tall. With blonde hair and an easy smile, she was a graduate student, roughly the same age as Lizzie and her friends. There was a dome tent set apart from two-sided standing tents. Chrissy commented that the tent reminded her of something one would see at a street festival. Luke explained that it functioned as their workstation/classroom. Inside was a lightweight table and two folding chairs. Atop the table were papers, held down by rocks, pens, mugs, and a laptop, which was not opened. In front of the workstation was a fire circle. Luke joined that it was their kitchen. This is only our first day at this site. We spend the last 2 weeks in the village. Luke pointed behind them, through the trees. There seemed to be a slight path dipping through the trunks and brush. Didn't realize there was another route in here. He looked at the dangling rope that the woman had used for descent. Of course, we didn't grasp this canyon even existed until we learned for ourselves that it was up here. The villagers didn't really want us to come up. Lizzie confirmed they hadn't seen the canyon on their map either. Brooke sat down on a log at the fire pit. She had asked if Luke and Ella had established the pit. Luke responded that it had been there when they had arrived. Aubrey inquired about what the village was called. Luke said something that sounded like Saudonais, the people of the beaver, one of the native tribes of Canada. Excuse me, indigenous people is what they call them up here. Brooke looked up in surprise. You're not Canadians? No, we're American. Aubrey shared that they too were from the United States. What are the odds we'd meet in the middle of nowhere? Luke laughed. I'm sure there aren't any. So you girls are just climbing your way through the mountains then? Aubrey gave Luke and Ella a brief history on their yearly trips. Where are you guys from? I'm a professor, up here with my research assistants from Four Corners University. Brooke dismissively dragged her heel in the dirt. Never heard of it. Again, Luke laughed. Regardless, we're doing some research on native mythology and historical tribal stories. For Saudonais, it's one and the same. Luke looked uncomfortably at Lizzie, as if he'd offended her. What she found offensive was his look, not his statement. Lizzie's ebony skin was clear indication her ancestral roots sprouted from Africa. She was struck by no urge to rescue him from a faux pas of his own making. Ella had stepped in. I bet you're hungry. We were about to take a break for lunch anyway. Join us. Chrissy volunteered to help Jamie and Ella. Brooke set up her tent after conferring with Aubrey that they would spend the night there. Aubrey visited more with Luke in the workstation tent. A resemblance in Luke caused an uneasy feeling in Lizzie. Trying to avoid looking at him, she noticed a shelter before unseen. Its material blended in seamlessly with the foliage and rock of the canyon. She moved her position and with perception. One shadow remained constant. A dark entrance, smaller than a standard doorway, could be made out. Part cave, part structure of logs, it was certainly made by human hands. It lay farther into the canyon, in a grove between the cliff wall and the campsite. Lizzie was about to call it to the company's attention when crunching and snapping came from the forest. Lizzie screwed her torso to inspect its cause. A large animal, perhaps. Technically correct. From the concentrated growth materialized a man. The Saudonais village had a single dirt road bisecting dwellings until it reached a dead end at a stream. On either side of the road were houses constructed of rock and mortar. The material looked as if it had been quarried from the mountains above them. The Saudonais people were traditionally a nomadic tribe, migrating with the seasons and food sources. This village was rare in that it was established and permanent. There were a dozen or so structures, including the communal storage house. This is why Luke had selected this tribe at this location for his research team. The 4-member team consisted of Luke and Ella, as well as 2 young men, Jamie and Drake. A stream ran behind the houses closer to the mountain, then turned and crossed the dirt road before running off down the hillside, disappearing into the forest. Where the stream cut off the road, a pond or a large flat well had been created with a dam of rocks placed for walls and bottom. This holding pond/well served as the water source for the entire village. It had been when Drake, the expedition's language expert, had knelt to refill his canteen from the pond that he noticed just before the water emptied into the stream and was lost into the woods, and that there were stones spaced across what served as the pond's spillway. The spacing matched the easy steps of an adult. Scanning the area on the far side of the pond, Drake saw what he'd always seen: a large boulder with trees growing on either side, an impenetrable natural wall. Then he saw something that he had not seen before, what could have been a thin, tight trail behind the brush near the pond to what could have been an even tighter path between boulder and one of the pines. Guilt, suspicion, or apprehension had caused Drake to look about him to verify that he had held the interest of none of the Saudane villagers before he stepped across the stone spillway and followed the trail. He pushed between the tree and boulder, and on the other side found more forest, but twisting upward through the trees was clearly a marked and traveled trail. From what he could see of the canyon, Drake estimated it would take no more than a few moments to reach it. He was wrong. The trail wound and it continued, not in any switchback serpentine manner. It was just a trail that went on with each new perspective, cresting a small rise that Drake calculated to be the final in reaching his destination. It would reveal another 30 to 40 yards of forest ahead. Rounding a bend that surely had to be the last, wasn't, as it too revealed more trail laid out before him. The trip, estimated in minutes, topped an hour before the trail led Drake to a clearing at the base of a canyon. There hadn't appeared to be any settlement or activity at the clearing, and the canyon, like the village access below, was blocked by yet another natural barrier. Did this wall have secret circumvention like the path that Drake had discovered around the boulder at the pond? Not wanting to stay longer to investigate, for fear of being found missing in the village, Drake headed back. He had not investigated, but was confident he would. In the village, Drake shared his discovery with the team and confided in them that he believed there was something of importance about or in the canyon due to the clandestine camouflage of access. People don't hide things unless they consider them precious. After confirming Drake's path existed, Luke had visited with the villagers about what lay in the canyon. The villagers were not pleased with the topic. Initially, they denied any hidden trail, then claimed it wasn't hidden, just ill-used since nothing was up there. Their academic, inquisitive minds were not to be deflected. After questions and relentless hounding, the villagers finally told the university group that the path was used to take periodic tribute to their shaman who lived up there. And the canyon held nothing, and there was no way to enter it. In hundreds of years, no villager had found a way into the canyon. Later in the work tent, Drake summed up his impression for his three colleagues. The Saudane are lying. A few days to let things settle, and the loosening of a younger villager's lips, with help from a secreted bottle of rye, and Jamie was able to elicit that the canyon did hold some mystery along the lines of ancestors and spirits. That had been enough for both Luke and Drake to agree to push into the canyon. When Luke broached the subject with the villagers, under the pretext of interviewing their shaman, he could not have offered a less popular proposal. Indignantly, they explained that the shaman lived apart from the village for a reason. His isolation was part of his discipline. Outside visitors could negatively affect his abilities. Wasn't it enough that the villagers had allowed the academics access to their daily lives? Did they have to disrespect their beliefs and traditions by invading shaman's holy space? Villagers had begun to demand the academics pack up and leave immediately. The only way to calm the villagers had been to lie and tell them that the research was all but finished, and not only would they stay away from the canyon, but they would shortly pack up their camp and hike back out, leaving the village. The clandestine plan was that at nightfall, Luke and Ella would sneak out on the hidden trail and set up a new camp near Shaman, at the end of the trail near the canyon. They would take everything they could and leave the rest for Drake and Jamie to pack. Then, waiting another day to use the same deception, Drake and Jamie would join Luke and Ella. The plan collapsed when Jamie asked the villagers if he and Drake could take some supplies from the village, namely food. Why would they need food if they were returning to their world? Thinking quickly, Jamie told them that he and Drake were planning on hiking around in the mountains for a little while before going back. The villagers were not buying it. Jamie ran to Drake and informed him that the villagers were upset. Drake wasn't finished packing. "Grab what you can. We'll take what we can and carry and leave now." Jamie wasn't certain in which direction Drake intended to depart. "We're going up to the canyon. We'll walk right out of the village. What are they going to do, stop us?" Drake's rhetorical question was in the answer to Jamie's concern about the villagers preventing them from taking the trail. Abandoning a majority of their supplies, including the limited but much-needed food that had caused the problem, Drake and Jamie marched up the dirt road through the village. Realizing what the two white men were doing, the villagers yelled at them. They yelled pleads and warnings and finally threats, which only increased the speed at which Drake and Jamie overtook the pond and smashed through the space between tree and boulder. "Told you they wouldn't be happy. And I told you they would not try to stop us." Drake took the lead with Jamie as close behind him as he could without stepping on the back of Drake's boots. As they got farther away from the village, Jamie's worried looks behind them over his shoulder grew less frequent. They weren't being followed. They were safe. The man who appeared from the forest was much more surprised to see Lizzie and Brooke than they were of him. He hadn't introduced himself. Instead, he walked past them into the workstation tent. Behind him came a small man, Jamie. They were welcomed back by name, followed by another round of introductions. Drake, the explorer, was average height with red hair and carried an air of confidence and intrigue, as he carried a secret, and with it, a knowledge so treasured that discovery would bring a forgotten spirit forth to the academic world and will launch me into international recognition. Drake reverted to shaking his head. Luke's elucidation had similar effects on all three women at the fire pit. None were interested in listening to the batty professor and his talk of spirits. This did not stop him from continuing his lecture, nor did his lecture stop his audience from moving about as they cleaned up lunch and set up their own camp. Brooke and Lizzie shared one tent, Aubrey and Chrissy the other. Brooke and Lizzie sat with folded legs. Lizzie held her map, and she and Brooke stared up at what was visible of the canyon. Before them was an area of rock and overgrown foliage that seemed an impenetrable barrier. Brooke asked Lizzie to estimate how much farther the canyon went. She used her finger against the map's legend and counted the digits within the unmarked green space. 5.5 miles was her guess. Nope, sorry, that's kilometers. Brooke calculated the conversion to just under 3.5 miles. Look at those walls, they're nearly vertical. Brooke shook out her blonde hair and gathered it with a band in a ponytail. It seemed like the canyon continues to weave and cut back on itself, from what we can see. Lizzie thought it might resemble a lightning bolt in shape. Brooke wondered aloud what might be at the top. It goes behind the last peak, so we can't see where it ends, or how much farther it goes up. Brooke repeated Lizzie's statement. It doesn't look normal. What, Lizzie? The canyon, the way it's formed, it doesn't look normal. You mean natural? That was exactly what Lizzie meant. No force of nature, erosion, or earthquake had caused this canyon to appear. And there's no stream. Aren't canyons supposed to have a stream or river or some flowing water? The light doesn't penetrate it. Notice the sun only hits the peaks around it. It's summer, so this is about the furthest point north the sun would get. The way the canyon slants, it gets no direct sunlight. It makes me want to go explore it. Lizzie didn't agree. Her fascination was the ill feeling, the shivers and chills, and the foreboding menace it projected. Lizzie drew on her map, then held it up for Brooke to see. Brooke laughed at the skull and crossbones decorating the empty green on the map. You're not really worried, are you? No, Lizzie lied. It just bothers me that it's not on the map. What if we get lost or need help? It sounded like that red-headed guy knows his way around and wants to go up too. What about what they said about the villagers? That no one is supposed to go into the canyon? I didn't hear anyone say that. The only thing I heard was that they're trying to protect some spirit. We're not going to go up there to disturb any spirit or anything. We're just going up there to explore. Who said we're going up there at all? Don't wuss out on me, girl. We're here to have fun and adventure. Brooke stood and stretched out her legs. Care to go explore a bit into this forest? Maybe make our way down this village we keep hearing about. Lizzie stayed seated, carefully folding her map. The spell the canyon had cast upon her was challenging to break. She wanted a diversion of exercise, but her focal point remained on the canyon. Brooke dusted the seat of her pants. What's that? She aimed her voice at the aperture. Is that a doorway? The doorway. How had Lizzie forgotten about the doorway? Drake's startling interruption had wiped it from her mind. Yeah, I noticed it earlier. Brooke smiled mischievously at Lizzie. Let's go have a look. She hefted Lizzie to standing and actually pulled her by the hand to get her marching in the direction of the dark opening. They advanced to the camp, swinging around the log seats of the fire pit. Crossing the clearing to the grove, they were a few sparse trees of oak before the opening. Brooke grabbed the bare trunk of a tree as she approached. Down on her haunches, she turned sideways to peer into the darkness. She thought she could make out shapes, something moving, and there was the slightest of breezes emanating from the mouth into which she leaned her head. No, don't go in there. Ella bolted and stumbled hurriedly toward Brooke and Lizzie, yelling for them to stop. They both watched Ella frantically reach them. You are not allowed in there. None of us are. It's trespassing. Brooke stood up to meet Ella at eye level. Calm down, girl. What's the big deal? It's the mystical arts. That's a protected place and we can't enter. That's stupid. It's okay. Lizzie held up a hand to her friend. Maybe we'd better listen to our hosts. Ella shook her head and swallowed. We're not your hosts. We're guests here too. We have to follow the same rules you do. Brooke wanted to know who was in charge here and who was responsible for enforcing these rules. Ella turned and pointed across the clearing to someone the woman had not seen before. He is. If you guys enjoyed part 1, be sure to go ahead and click below on the link and check out the full book of the Guised Passage. Stay tuned as we'll be diving into chapter 2 and other terrifying accounts and stories coming to you.